Welcome back, Time Crunch fans. I'm your host, Coach Adam Pulford. In the past episodes with Dr. Gabriella Gallo from Knowledge is What, we learned that training at fat max can help improve glycogen sparing for longer events, making you more durable to intensity when you hit it hard late in the race. We also learned that those overly focused on increasing FTP or VO2 max may not necessarily have high durability, but that's okay if that's in line with the performance determinants of your races. Now, let's bring some of this all home by talking about how carbohydrate influences performance when fresh and when performance while fatigued. So, Dr. Gallo, welcome back to the show.
Hi, Adam, and thank you again for inviting me, and also hello to all your listeners.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think our listeners, they're going to learn a ton from you in all three of these episodes here. But I'll put this out there as kind of the not so shameless plug, because I think a lot of our listeners should probably subscribe to a little bit more of your research, especially in Substack. So could you take a minute and just describe what you're producing on Substack, and if people like what they're hearing here, how they can access that?
Okay, so thanks. Basically, at the beginning, I was just trying to put material on the social media accounts, so Instagram and X or Twitter or whatever, and so infographics, so just a graph with a one line or two line explanation of results. But then I saw that people were commenting or writing in direct something like, okay, but what about this? What about this? And so I felt that a good way to extend the contribution to the community was just to try to make to write something about the infographics and each study that was explained in infographics in a short note. So basically on Substack, I'm just trying to explain the infographics results from scientific studies in a 3 minutes, 4 minutes reading. Because as your podcast, because there are time crunch cyclists and also time crunch readers. So this is the
That's it.
goal.
Yeah, that's it. And it's funny too, because I remember seeing your stuff on Twitter a while back, and it was when like Oscar Zukenrup, and there was a few others, like when infographics and exercise physiology were becoming a thing. I was really into them, right? But then I saw and then a lot of people were doing them, and I was like, oh, just another infographic. Kind of got out of that for a while, but then I picked your stuff back up, really in Substack, because I was like, oh wow, this is like, brilliant. It's on point, like it's clean. It is short and to the point, 3 to 5 minutes. So I think taking complex information and making it simple is probably one of the hardest things to do in any science. And your evolution from kind of infographic to and you still have that, like as part of some of the stuff I see on Instagram, and I'm not really on X anymore, but that's really good just for the quick visual. And then the Substack just has that just a little explainer that goes on with it. So thanks again for producing that content. I think it's really relevant for anybody who's been in this sport, as long as I have, coaching for a long time, or even somebody who's really curious, maybe just picked up the bike and started training a year or two ago. Your stuff is really digestible to make this complex stuff easy to understand.
Yeah. Thanks, Adam. This was and this is the goal. So just try to make learning as easy as possible without overcomplicating things, but explaining in a fast, easy way, but just keeping the concept easy and understandable for
Love it.
everyone. So from the coach to the exercise physiologist to the self-coach cyclist, this is
Yeah.
the goal.
Love it. Love it. Well, we're going to talk about another trendy topic today, since everybody is, guzzling and gobbling carbohydrates like it's crazy.
Yeah.
I want to talk about carbohydrate and how it relates to performance, but in particular, how does carbohydrate intake influence durability?
Yeah. I think this is one of the hottest topic in the last year. in the last
Yeah.
years, especially in road cycling, because of is the one of the one of the competition with the longest duration. And basically, as we said in the last episodes, we know that durability, so the ability to decrease performance as less as possible during prolonged exercise or competitions, is linked to being able to preserve muscle glycogens, so carbs inside the muscle. So basically, you have two ways to preserve this muscle glycogen. One is to use more fats and less carbs to produce energy. This is one way. And the other way is the types of carbs that you use to produce energy. So if you are using more exogenous carbs instead of endogenous, where endogenous is muscle glycogen, it can be, of course, better for performance because you are sparing that muscle glycogen. So
And
this
exogenous
is
is stuff we're taking in, we're eating and drinking.
yeah, exogenous is stuff that you are eating. You can eat it before and especially during effort.
Yeah, so really that glycogen sparing effect still playing a role. We learned about that in part one, and having enough having enough carbohydrate or glycogen on board in order to produce the energy when it matters in the race, really referring to that durability, is what we're talking about here. So whether we load it and have it on board, or we spare for it because we're so fat adapted, or whatever term you want to use, this is where it hits home. One one research that you wrote about that I want to talk about has some terms that I think we need to first define, because the terms in your paper, they're similar terms than what I talk about, or the terminology I use on this podcast, but
Yeah.
we're gonna see how it influences. So let's first talk about what critical power is and what W prime is. Can you
Okay.
describe to our listeners what those are, and then I can fill in some gaps?
Yeah. So basically, using critical power and W prime is just another way to describe human metabolism during exercise, and there are two parameters that describe uh, two different part of performance. We can say critical power as more aerobic qualities of performance, and basically it is just a benchmark in power output that divides uh, a nonlinear response in fatigue. So above the critical power, you are fatiguing very fast from a metabolic point of view. You're accumulating a lot of hydrogen ions and other molecules that inside the muscle are linked to fatigue. While below critical power, these metabolites like hydrogen ions and are K plus and other, but their accumulation is much slower. So you are fatiguing less below critical power. So if your critical power is higher, you have more, let's say, aerobic qualities, and you can have a better performance over 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 1 hour, and something like this. While W prime is W prime define the anaerobic reserve. So basically, is the work that you can perform above the critical power. So let's say that two athletes have the same critical power, and one has a higher anaerobic reserve or W prime compared to the other one. The first can perform better in efforts like 30 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes that that are using more anaerobic pathways. So these are the general general physiological description of the two parameters.
Yeah, exactly. And I'd say to make things like as simple as possible and kind of link it to the terminology I use on the podcast is critical power correlates to FTP or
Yeah,
LT2, or
yeah, exactly.
threshold, what we call threshold.
Yeah, it's very near. Yeah.
Yep. W prime correlates to something that I refer to as functional reserve capacity, or FRC. That marker that's measured in kilojoules, and it's an anaerobic marker measuring the highest amount of work, like I said, in kilojoules, that you can produce over FTP for one-time effort before you fatigue and have to pace down. So
Yeah.
I would say it's similar to, because even with that term, I still call it the anaerobic battery, right? And it's more or less the same. And it's important for our listeners to understand critical power, roughly FTP, W prime. If you're ever like reading or listening to something where they're talking about W prime, it's very similar to that FRC component.
Yeah. I think are are similar and different point of view, but the concept is exactly this one. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's it. So, Dr. Yellow, walk us through your research when you were looking at critical power in a rested state versus a fatigue state, and then you throw in some carbohydrate as well as with W prime.
I published a resume of this interesting research some weeks ago on Substack, and it was a paper from a British research team that the leader is Professor Andrew Jones, that is very popular around the sports science. He's one of the most important exercise physiologists, and basically. They wanted to see if ingesting carbs during exercise is linked to better durability. So basically, if the strategy that everyone is employing on the field is real better for durability, and also they wanted to verify directly if preserving muscle glycogen is linked to a better durability. So these two were the main goals. So they basically just recruited cyclists. They were not professional cyclists, but they were just amateur recreational cyclists, and they brought them to their lab. And basically, they performed 3 trials in the lab in 3 different days uh, to evaluate the 2 parameters that we described before, so critical power and W prime, in 3 different conditions. The first one was at rested state, so they just visited the lab, and at rested state, after a short warm up, they performed a test to evaluate these 2 parameters. A second day, they repeated the same test, but after it was 2 hours of exercise before the test without ingesting carbs. And on the third day, they did the same of the second day, but ingesting carb during the 2 hours. It was 60 grams per hour, that is inside the general recommendation of carb ingestion during exercise to maximize performance. So this was the protocol. And they also measure muscle glycogen depletion after the 2 hours to see if there was a correlation between this parameter and durability. So durability was defined as the decrease in performance that were measured as CP and W prime. So these 2 parameters between rested state and after 2 hours of exercise. And I think the results are interesting and also sometimes difficult to completely understand at all. But what they saw was that generally performance was better maintained when they ingested carbs compared to when they did not ingest carbs, uh, especially for critical power. While for W prime, even ingesting carbohydrates during the 2 hours, the parameters decreased. So ingesting carbs preserve critical power, but not W prime. So this was the main outcome.
Yeah. So essentially, like ingesting carbs is going to help you when you do a bunch of work. You go 20 minutes really hard, plus or minus a few minutes, right? So that's the hard, long, grindy thing. That's the fatigue resistance or the durability test kind of that we're talking about in previous episodes. So carbohydrates really helps with that. But it doesn't help if you've got a 30-second or a 60-second max effort at the end of getting fatigued. Why is that?
Yeah. This is an interesting question, and I don't have the definitive answer to this. And I don't know, maybe carbs availability and muscle glycogen is more linked to uh, preserving the anaerobic pathways, so the pathways that are more linked to W prime and less to CP. But this was not measured in the study, so we cannot answer at all. And yeah, that's it. So this is let's say first stone to understand, and with other studies, other things that so we can answer in a better way to this question. So we can just say that carbs preserve in some extent performance, but not all your performance level. So this is the general outcome.
Yeah, that's it. And I think what's a very okay answer is we don't know, and
Yeah,
further research needed, right? But
yeah,
it's
yeah,
okay
yeah.
to say we don't know. But here's
Yeah,
an observation, right?
yeah, yeah. One time, I at a congress, I heard this phrase that I think it's very funny, that there is something that we know, something that we don't know, and something that we don't know.
That's it. That's it. Yeah, the older I get, there's a lot of this stuff that I know I need to know more. That's
Yeah, 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 yeah.
yeah. But so I'd say so for those who are, maybe the anaerobic animals out there that say, well, how do I improve my W prime or my FRC late in the game? My advice, my personal advice, and I'll be curious what Dr. Gallo says, is make it higher in a fresh state, in a rested state. So if you can improve the absolute, and that goes back to like part two, what we were talking about, improve your absolutes when you're rested, it's probably always going to decrease in a fatigue state, but it's going to be less than if you didn't train it to be high in the first place. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. That's, I think that's always reasonable. So, of course, if you if you are able to improve your parameters at resting state, then if then your decrease after 3 hours is the same, you are still better after 3 hours because you improved your parameters at resting state. So,
Yep.
uh, as we said in the last episode, is the last part of the cake, durability. So to improve performance in general, just at the beginning, focus on improving your parameters at resting state, that W prime, CP, or whatever, and then durability uh, follow after all these kind of things. So the athlete is FTP, VO2 max, threshold, W prime, and then if you want to optimize for long duration competitions, you can also focus on durability. Just not start with durability.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a good summary. Another thing though pops out to me when I read that review of the research, and it is that if somebody does their training properly and they identify themselves as having a high durability, but if they get their fueling wrong on race day, it doesn't matter. Their durability is going to decrease.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
So
yeah.
this speaks to that importance of carbohydrate fueling and in how to do that. So to you, Dr. Gallo, when it comes to the right carbohydrate fueling, can you talk about a few parameters when it comes to that? Because this study we're 60 grams of carbohydrate. Talk about that. Talk about some ranges. Go with it
Yeah.
wherever you want.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's one. This is one of the hottest topic right now in sports science, is the how much carbs ingesting during exercise. So this is the hottest topic, and I think that, so just to understand the framework, as we said before, ingesting carbs during exercise can make you able to use these carbs instead of muscle glycogen to produce energy. And so preserving muscle glycogen, your durability is likely to improve. So how much carbs ingesting during exercise? I think that we can have two different point of views. Research that have been already published and the latest approaches on the field, especially in professional road cycling. So from just a research point of view, the best range is something like between, let's say, 30 and 90 grams per hour. So you have the best effect on performance at the end of fatiguing exercise using these amounts. So some studies show something like a reverse U relationship between performance optimization and carbs ingestion. So below 30 grams per hour is uh, is very low, carbs ingestion and performance can be not optimized, and the same as above 90 grams per hour. But so why professional cyclists are eating something like 120, 140 grams per hour in the longest and hardest races in World Tour? Uh, One thing is that in research, participants were, let's say, trained cyclists. So, but the FTP was lower compared to the professional cyclists. So, it is very likely, it is not likely, it is sure that their carbs consumption was lower compared to World Tour cyclists. So, this is one thing. The other thing is that maybe the main factor that limit carbs consumption exogenous, so ingested carbs consumption during exercise, is absorption. So the absorption of carbs, and there is something like, I think everyone know gut training. So usually in a research setting, people that are participants are not doing something like gut training before the protocol, before the test, while professional cyclists are more familiar with ingesting high amounts for maybe they are doing it for years, at least for months. So a theory is that if you are trained to ingest more than 100 grams per hour of carbs during exercise, then you are able to absorb and utilize it. But from a just data and a research point of view, the maximum amount of carbs that can be used, so exogenous carbs, is something like 90, 100 grams per hour, not more. So there is a mismatch between practice and research in this topic.
Yeah, exactly. And this is evolving as well. And I've covered multiple podcasts on this, and this is an evolving topic of sorts. And I've explained my rationale on the podcast and working even with some training peak stuff where, as opposed to just working with that 30 to 90 grams of carbohydrate with my athletes, I use percentages of burn rates from the kilojoule expenditure on their power meters. So when I'm having a performance race day or performance workout, I want the athlete to consume 40 to 50% of their output from their power meter using kilojoules. And that usually ends up being around that. It correlates to, say, the upper end of that 30 to 90 gram range. And if you do the math for my like world tour athletes, they have higher FTPs, therefore higher burn rates, and they're going to be at the upper end slash over that. But there are some nuances that from other research, it's gut training, it's the microbiome, it's the individuality of elite athletes that allow that carbohydrate utilization, absorption, and substrate utilization at those high intensities. I think that there's more there that research will deduce from. Meanwhile, the other thing is we've also been able to push upper limits. It used to be like 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrate per hour was the recommendation. But now, with kind of that a better ratio of glucose, maltodextrin and glucose and fructose of that 1 to 0.8 ratio, that's also allowing for better absorption rates for all athletes, especially elite athletes.
Yeah. This is one thing that all the carbs that are on the market use this ratio between maltodextrin and or glucose and fructose because of these two different types of carbs uses two different transporters to be absorbed and to go in the blood, and so it just like you have two doors to enter instead of only one if you use two different types of carbs, so maltodextrins and glucose, or glucose and fructose. So this is why research show that we can pass from 30 or 60 to 90 grams per hour combining fructose with glucose or maltodextrin.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, carbohydrates are king when it comes to performance, and that performance is high intensity. Whether you do it in a fatigue state or in a rested state, carbs will always help increase performance. Now, to that point though, because looking back on our little mini series here in the podcast, we started with peak fat oxidation and fat max training. Then we talked about optimizing FTP, VO2. We're weaving in fatigue resistance and durability here. At the end of the day, like, more training prevails with training your body to be a high performance machine. So there's a lot to be said with training, not only of the day, but training of the week, training of the year, and training of the years. Just having a lot of training impulses for over 10 years. Okay, and we talked about how you, as a time crunched athlete, you need to get creative on how you get those total hours done, and when you have time, go longer for the distance and decrease some of that intensity. But I think, like, as I think about all these things that we're talking about, the preservation of muscle glycogen and utilizing fat as a fuel source, we have to also understand that there's just a ton of fat on our bodies, even for like lean people. So to me, it seems like, in theory, if you can kind of optimize all of this, like get your peak fat oxidation rates up there, do your intensity training, like you'll be able to just train more. Is that a thing? If we optimize this, I mean, you essentially can just do more on the day, recover faster, and become a better athlete. Is that true?
Yeah. This is one interesting thing that I also listened this from my colleagues from Auckland University of Technology that I cited in the last episode. Is where I spent my last year of PhD in New Zealand, and there, especially Dr. Edmonder said me that one thing about being able to oxidize more fats, yes, could be good for performance, for durability, because you can spare glycogen during the race, but also if you use more fats during your training sessions, maybe you can also be able to train more, but during the same training session, because maybe you can go longer at the same intensity because you oxidize more fats and use less muscle glycogen. And maybe this was something that I was thinking about, and that you just said, that you can also be able to recover better between different training sessions, so consecutive training sessions. Maybe during the same day, maybe if you do twice a day, or maybe between consecutive days, because you start with higher glycogen the following day or the second session during the same day. So yeah, absolutely. This is not supported by a scientific study, but it makes completely sense to me. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just want to mention that. I mean, because I threw a lot at you there, and it's good to hear that there are, thinking the same way, with that kind of like total training approach. But I think, like, the practical takeaways here are, from this carbohydrate fueling, or carbohydrate is king, is like, first of all, use the right carbohydrate combinations. So that combination of maltodextrin, glucose, fructose, 1 to zero point 0.8 ratio, that's best. You want to improve your ability to burn fat as fuel, like we talked about in episode 1. And then, last thing is, if you're going to have a high intensity session, make sure that you're topped off going into that. And we spoke a little bit about this too, where you can do some macronutrient cycling, or, kind of like live low in carbohydrate land and then kind of come back up when your intensity is high. But if you have high intensity periods, make sure that you eat pasta, you eat rice, like you have muscle
Yeah.
glycogen on board before you go and
Italian
smash
pasta.
the
Yeah.
intervals. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it completely makes sense to adapt nutrition to periodization, both for the macro cycle. So, for example, if you are going easier during the base period, maybe you can just stay a little bit lower with carbs, and then during the more specific period with high training load, with high intensity workouts, just you can eat more carbs, and but also at the microcycle level. So for example, just before a low intensity session, it is not necessary to eat a lot of carbs pre and during, because then you can focus on improving or at least spending time at your peak fat oxidation or at high level of fat oxidation, while for shorter or medium duration and high intensity workouts, ingesting carbs could be very important to be able to perform at your maximum quality the workout.
Yeah. So, I mean, essentially what you're saying there is if you take carbohydrate, if you take a gel before your 90-minute endurance session, if you take it like 10 minutes before, you're essentially going to tell your body to start burning carbohydrate as a fuel source versus
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah,
fats.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. There is an inhibition of lipolysis. If you eat carbs just before or during your workout, lipolysis is inhibited. So of course there is lipolysis. There is not inhibition, complete inhibition, but your fat oxidation rates are lowered if you ingest carbs before or during exercise. Yes.
Yeah. But if you're at the start line of a cross country mountain bike race, having a gel 10 to 15 minutes before, that's probably pretty ideal, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Because here the goal is performance optimization and not physiological stimulation of fat oxidation. So two different scenarios, two different goals, two different nutrition strategies.
Gosh. Well, Dr. Gallo, I feel like I could probably do podcasts with you like every day, all year. So,
Yeah,
but
it was fun. It's fun.
yeah, I do need to get back to some coaching, and you need to get back to pumping out more great content on Substack. So,
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, I just want to thank you again for taking all the time to talk to us and sharing your knowledge with our listeners. We talked about, where to find you on the socials and again on Substack. Is there anything else that you want to tell our listeners in the way of finding more information from you?
yeah, yeah. Just stick with social media and Substack. And Substack, you can find everything there. On social media, I'm putting something like free content almost every day about cycling science to performance optimization. While on Substack, there is a small fee, something like €5 per month, and you can have a deeper look at scientific studies and understand more. So, social media and Substack, you can find everything that you want that I'm producing at the moment.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, I've already got some ideas for future episodes. So, Dr. Gallo, I'll probably be in touch soon. But for now, I'll let you go. And to our listeners, thank you so much for listening to the Time Crunch Cyclist. I hope all of this information really adds value to your training.
Yeah. Thanks, Adam.
Thanks. Bye.